everyone. I'm Brian Bates, and I trust Google Maps without questioning it.
West on.
I'm Linda DeYoung, and I unironically use the Kahoot music at parties.
And this is the One-to-One podcast, brought to you by the Learning Technology Center.
Hi, welcome to the One-to-One podcast. I hope that you're doing well. Brian, what's new? How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm excited for another episode. I've enjoyed what we've done so far, and looking forward to also not just this episode, but continuing this to go. Continuing to record more episodes, and so just thankful to be a part of this.
Yeah, me too. I mean, on my end of things, kind of same old, doing a lot of recording, videoing. But we do have the holidays coming up here soon. So, any holiday traditions that you're excited for, looking forward to?
You know, I think the thing that I enjoy the most about the holidays is just getting together, and I love to cook, and so anytime I can spend some time in the kitchen cooking, that's always a huge plus for me. Nothing really crazy, no like traditional meal that we have at certain times. There's a few things that stick out to me though. Like my mom always made cookies, honey mounds that I absolutely love. My dad makes a really good fudge, so I look forward to having those things, and then just spending some time with family and friends, and just getting away from work for a little bit and relaxing, and then recharging for the change of the calendar. How about you?
Well, my big holiday tradition every year is that I have a kind of an adopted family over here in my neck of the woods, and we make literally hundreds of sugar cookies for Christmas every year and do a big frosting of the cookies. And I'm talking some top grade cookie frosting here. Like, this is not, I'm going to smear a color and put some sprinkles on top. This is piping bags and Ziploc bags that we meticulously design and craft our frosting of these cookies. And then they end up getting given away to everyone that we know. We make little tins up, and it's part of our holiday presents to people. So I'm excited to get to the giant treat making extravaganza that always comes with the holidays.
That's awesome because I my cousin is an amazing, outstanding baker. Makes any kind of baked good you can think of, and they're phenomenal. But as much as I love to cook, I cannot bake. I don't. I never. I always end up being like, if I ever make cookies, um, they end up like have you ever seen a little chart where it's like this cookie had too much flour, this cookie had too much sugar, and like it's all the
Yes.
different like deformed like that's me when like every time I try to bake. So it's so funny that I love cooking so much, but I try to avoid baking at all costs because I'm just not good at it. My version of a sugar cookie for Christmas would be like the ones that you slice and it has the design in it already and you just drop it on a pan. Like that's
Yes.
about my level of baking. So I appreciate, and I look forward to hopefully seeing some pictures of these cookies that you decorate.
Oh, I'll be sending them over. Don't you worry.
I'm gonna get hungry if we keep talking about this. So let's get into our episode today. What do you think?
Yeah, that sounds great.
So I have been thinking a lot lately, much like I'm sure pretty much everybody in education has, about AI, its presence in education, and how it's kind of changing the landscape of what we know of teaching and learning. Um, but then it also has made me kind of think about the presence of AI in our conversations around pop culture, and um, I really have been fascinated by the idea that as I go back and look at my first kind of experiences of seeing AI in movies and things like that, um, it always ends up being AI is always kind of portrayed as being dangerous, inherently evil, just this terrible thing. it starts off as one thing, but ends up becoming this horrific thing. Like Hal in Space Odyssey, Skynet from the Terminator, the Robot Rebellion from the movie I Robot, which is a favorite of mine. Those are just a couple examples of how Hollywood loves to make AI the bad guy. And I think about my first experience with AI. Um, Way back when I was a kid, I was a huge fan of X Files. That's like my favorite TV show growing up. Probably watched it at too young of an age. I'm surprised I'm not freaked out by some of the things I saw in there. But there's one episode in particular in the first season called Ghost in the Machine, and it centers around an AI system that was developed. And this AI system overhears two executives. Spoiler alert. I mean, this was also back in like the early 90s. So if you haven't seen this episode, I'm sorry for spoiling it. But the AI overhears the two executives talking about how they were going to shut it down. They were going to shut the program down and move on from it. And it actually ended up luring in and killing one of those executives that was talking through like taking over the smart home systems that were in that building. And it's crazy because I know that on a previous episode I talked about how much I love the smart home features of of technology. So maybe somehow that kind of changed my perspective. But it just goes back to the idea that um, AI almost always is referred to as like this thing that becomes sentient, then it rebels against the humans that created it, and then it destroys all humans. So like I'm really curious as to see what your what's your first experience with seeing AI in popular culture, in the media, whatever, and what are your thoughts on how it's been portrayed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I would say the first piece of AI that I really started thinking about in media was Hal from 2001: A Space Odyssey. And, we most people know Hal, but if you don't, he is a robot that pilots a spaceship and he starts to kill the crew because of a glitch in his system. And I feel like the reason that we see AI in such a negative way is because for so long, humans have been at the top of, for lack of a better word, the food chain.
Hmm.
And we have created civilizations, we've created all of culture, all of these cool things. And now here is this presence, this new creature that is poised to be just as intelligent as humans and maybe even more intelligent than humans. And so, what do we do when all of a sudden we're threatened by the presence of something that might be smarter and more comprehensive in its knowledge than we are? I think humans are, of course, poised to be scared of anything that is going to maybe be a threat to our existence. And so, yeah, I think that's one of the major reasons why people might be afraid of AI and what it might mean for us as humans.
Like that idea of it being something that's like smarter than us and can do more than us and is better than us, and we don't like that idea. And so why is it that the idea is always that AI becomes sentient, it then rebels, and then it destroys? Like, why is it that kind of process? Why doesn't it ever become sentient and then become a complementary item to
Mhm.
us, not destruction?
I don't know. I maybe it's because we like to imagine or are scared of the worst possible thing happening, that we see these as cautionary tales of, if the worst possible thing happened and AI were to become sentient, it could destroy us. And maybe that also makes for a better movie or a better film or a better TV episode, than AI becoming our friends. But we do see, even though it's a little bit nefarious, we do see some of these depictions in movies like Her with Joaquin
Her, yeah.
Phoenix, where actually, it becomes like a love interest, and then it is a parasocial relationship and not just like a domineering overlord. But yeah, what are your thoughts, Brian? Do you feel like these are cautionary tales? And if they are, like, what do we do to live alongside AI in a responsible way and not have it just destroy us, right?
Well, It's really funny, and I appreciate when you said, like, that it's just not good for the storyline because that's 100% true. Like, I'm trying to rethink I'm rethinking the episode of The X-Files, and, like, that would not have been an episode if anybody that's listening, was a watcher of X-Files. Like, that wouldn't really fit in with the whole theme of the show if it was just like, "Oh, yeah, there's this really helpful AI thing," and so, yeah, that would not have worked. But yeah, I feel like we're always more worried about the unknown than we probably need to
Mm.
be. It's good to have caution, and just like with AI in the classroom, it's good to proceed with caution. I don't think that everybody should just throw caution to the wind and dive in head first without thinking through the positives and the negatives of using it both at the teacher side and the student side. But I think that I think that it comes down to we have to. It's here, whether we like it or
Mhm.
not.
True.
Um, and I think that at that point, we just have to, it's like you said, can we live alongside AI responsibly? So, can we figure out how to take and harness the power of AI and use it for good? And, maybe we can try to convince it somewhere along the line of becoming sentient that hey, be our friend, not our enemy. I think that's the path forward.
Yeah.
Well, I could go on. We could bring up a lot of other movies now that I'm starting to sit here think about some other situations where there's AI in a movie, but we won't. We'll get right going with our interview today. What do you think about that?
I think let's get going. I'm excited to start.
All right, let's go.
Hello, today we're joined by Matt Miller, educator, blogger, speaker, and author of 6 books, including Ditch That Textbook and AI for Educators. He has taught for more than a decade in public schools and has presented to thousands of educators all over the United States and beyond. Thanks for appearing on the podcast today.
Yes, absolutely. So excited to get to chat with you guys today.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, and welcome. Thanks for being a part of this today. Could you start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I taught high school Spanish here in little rural West Central Indiana for more than 10 years, teaching all levels of high school Spanish. I was a one-person department in a little bitty school district, which is great because, department meetings, there was never any conflict or never any disagreements. But then after teaching for a little while, started writing some books about my experiences and about education, just trying to support teachers and everything. And for the last 8 or 9 years or so, have been doing workshops and presentations with teachers and writing books and maintaining my blog and my email newsletter and all of that stuff. Just recently went back into the classroom this last spring to teach a full load of high school Spanish classes again, but really spend a lot of my time creating resources to support teachers to think about tech integration, engaging students, and also a lot of stuff about AI recently too.
Well, Matt, we're going to get into some of that return to the classroom and AI stuff a little bit later, but we love to start our interviews with our guests with a little game to get to know you better. And I thought today it would be fun to play a game I call Choose Wisely. I'll ask you some dilemmas, and you can let us know which one you would rather choose. Does that sound okay with you?
No, but I'll do it anyway. It terrifies me just a little bit. But yes, let's do it.
All right.
Let's do it. All right. So the first one is you can choose to troubleshoot tech issues in your classroom all week, or you can choose to have a fire drill every day.
Oh gosh. The fire drill is such a disruption. It's hard to get back to things, but that's something I can get past and then hopefully try to get something going. Whereas the tech issues could probably ruin the whole thing. So I think I'll pick the fire drills.
Ooh, good choice.
Good choice. The next one is you can choose to grade assignments using only voice feedback, or you can choose to grade assignments using only emoji reactions.
Oh my goodness. I feel like with I like some of the things with voice feedback, but I also feel like kids are less likely maybe to listen to it. So I'm going to go with the emojis because it's quick and to the point, and you can do a lot of communicating with just emojis.
That's true. I love
Yeah, you
emojis
probably
though.
connect a lot easier with students that
Probably
way.
right.
The next one is pretend there's a story that interests you. You can either choose to read the book or watch the movie. Which one do you choose?
It's always read the book. That's not even a question. Oh, the book is always better. How many times in your life have you heard anybody said, I read the book, but the movie was so much better? Never.
One
I think
time,
you're
and
right.
it's Lord of the Rings.
Really? Okay. All
I
right.
do.
Well, I'd say, 99% of the time, then it's probably the book was better. So I'll go with that.
The next one is you can choose to leave the house without your phone or without your shoes.
Oh my gosh. When you were saying that question, you said without your phone and I was almost like, let me just stop you right there. The answer is probably without my phone. I would probably be more willing. Oh gosh, this one's hard. Yeah, I really like the idea of leaving the house without my phone because then it means that it's not just constantly nagging me. And I try to do like little digital detoxes whenever I can and everything. I'm going to be brave and say I would rather have my shoes and leave the phone at home.
And our last one is you can choose to use only one EdTech tool for the rest of your career or be forced to try a new one every single week.
Oh gosh. Oh, I I immediately reacted no to the first one, but now I think I'm going to choose that because I would rather, yeah, I would rather get comfortable with something and learn the ins and outs of it and focus on teaching instead of focus on the technology. I think that would lend itself better to just having one. So I'll say one ed tech tool for the rest of my career.
Well, thanks for playing.
That was not as terrifying as I thought it was, but it was still hard.
Yeah, I could see that being a tough one, and I know that I do appreciate the fact that you're going to go out into the world with your shoes on. I think that that's a wise choice.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, yes.
Well, I'm just going to jump right into it because it's a question I've been dying to ask you since the end of the school year, and it's something I'm sure that you've probably talked just a little bit about. But that return to the classroom. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what was that like, and what did you see that was like completely different about teaching compared to when you left the classroom? I think you said like 8 or 9 years ago. Like,
Yeah.
and what did you find that was like the same?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. That's kind of the way that I phrase it. So yeah, I'd been out of the classroom for about 8 years, and at my kids' school, at their high school, where my two daughters were going to school at the time, and also where my wife teaches social studies. At their high school, the Spanish teacher was leaving to take another job halfway through the year. So after the fall semester was over, she was going to be gone, and we're in little rural middle of nowhere Indiana, and it's hard enough to find Spanish teachers, but it's even harder for us to find one, and then to find one mid-year, it just wasn't going to happen. So when all of the most important ladies in your life come to you and are like, please, 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 it's like, well, what do? You say yes,
Yeah.
So I decided to go back, and I was teaching a full load of high school Spanish classes for that one spring semester, same classes I had taught before, alongside a lot of the same colleagues that I used to teach with. And so I got in, and I was just kind of like trying to get back into the swing of things, trying to get back into the routine, and get back into my teacher groove, so to speak. And once I started to get my feet under me, I was able to start trying some of the things that I've been talking about in my workshops and my presentations and in my blog and my books and everything. And that was part of the reason, honestly, I wanted to go back. Was I wanted to see if I use some of this stuff in my own classroom as a case study. Does it work? And does it work well? And can I continue to recommend that teachers do it? And so it was really good for me to do that. So now, Brian, to get to your question, what was similar and what was different? One of the things, it's been 8 years. So in those 8 years, a lot of things has happened in the education world. Cell phones have come on in a big way and have become a bigger and bigger part of our lives, and the addiction and all of that stuff. Remote teaching and COVID all happened in that amount of time, and then also we've got all of the AI stuff that's come on recently. And so, a lot of things changed. And so I think the big thing that was the biggest difference was the grip that the cell phone has on those kids. Just like the constant dopamine rush that they get whenever there's a ping and a notification. They got to check it, and they got to check it, and they got to check it, and they're constantly, they don't want to fall behind in communications with their friends. They don't want to miss out on anything, and it's an issue. And you can start to see why cell phone bans are a big discussion in a lot of schools and school districts, because it's something that we didn't deal with in the same way when we were in school, and our grandparents and our parents and everything. That was different. But I think that the thing that made me that encouraged me the most was that a lot of things were still the same. I came back and I thought, you hear people say this on social media a lot. It's like, oh, kids are different these days. Kids are different after this happened, or after this happened, or after this happened. Kids are just different. And I went back in the classroom and I was like, maybe I'm in a little bubble that's different than everybody else or something. But yeah, they're more addicted to their cell phones. There are some technology things that impact things, but really, like, kids are kids. Humans are humans.
Absolutely.
Learning is still learning. Like a lot of those those core principles of good teaching and learning and interacting with your students and stuff, like, it's all still there. A lot of the kids still laugh at the same jokes. They're still interested in the same type of stuff. Like a lot of that stuff still is the same. So I was very encouraged by that. Some of the means of delivery have changed. Some of the tech tools have changed. And so some of that stuff is a little bit different, but really, like, the stuff that I loved about education, thankfully, is still very much the same. And that made me really happy.
That's awesome. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's encouraging. And I know that you touched a little bit on, how you wanted to make sure that the strategies that you were developing when you were out of the classroom are still relevant in.
Mhm.
I'm very interested to hear how this experience of returning to the classroom is going to drive the next, let's say, 5 years of your work.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So it was sort of a glimpse. I mean, it was a semester, right? And so it was a time for me to validate and try out some things. It wasn't like a comprehensive, like mad scientist in his lab trying all of the things. There was only
Mhm.
so much that I could really get to, but I think that it also did reinforce. So if we're looking to the future, right, of like, how can
Mhm.
I advise teachers to, be at their best and prepare students for the next 5 years and everything. I think some of it really comes back to the fact that students are still at the center of everything that we need to do. There's all of this talk about AI right now, and we see all of the changes and the advances in the technology, and how every pundit is talking about how it's going to change the world and everything. And I'm one of those pundits. I talk about it too. But I think even in the midst of all of that, there's still some of that, like, core fundamental stuff that students are still gonna need to know. And I think we've still got to stay focused on that. We've still got to stay focused on the student. It's easy for us to say, oh, AI is the future. AI is here and it's not going to go anywhere. So by golly, you better get on board. But
Yeah.
there are places where if you use AI, it's still not best for student learning. Just because it's AI doesn't mean that it's preparing you for a future of AI and a world of AI. There's some of those AI tools out there that stand in the way of the desirable difficulties that we want students to have, for them to be able to wrestle, for them to be able to go think through things and to grow as a human being and everything. And so I think looking forward in that way, that's one of the big things that it informed me on, is that if we want to prepare students, I'm looking at these students in my classroom and I'm like, what can I do to help prepare them? And honestly, it's some of the stuff that we've always done in education. We're going to need to make big adjustments and big changes in some ways. But again, it's kind of like what I was saying earlier about the original question. Like, kids are
Yeah.
kids, humans are humans to some extent. So we don't have to totally reinvent the wheel. So lots of ways that I could answer that question. If you ask me again tomorrow, I'd probably have a different answer, but that's the one that I came up with at this moment.
Well, and honestly, with the speed of AI, tomorrow you probably you might have a different answer because something might have changed at this
It's
point.
true.
But
Yeah.
sticking with AI and merging it with the work you had done up until AI took off and blew up. The
Mhm.
idea, ditch that textbook.
Mhm.
Um, you mentioned that AI can be something that helps those teachers ditch the textbook. So,
Mhm.
could you elaborate on that? What that looks like? What suggestions you might have to have AI help with those concepts that you've been talking about now for several years?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm glad that you touched on that concept of ditch that textbook. It's it goes back to my own classroom where I realized that if I just marched chapter by chapter through a textbook and just assigned worksheets and we did the questions at the end of the chapter, that my students weren't learning Spanish. And so
Mhm.
it's like that sort of prepackaged, not thinking about things type of environment that wasn't best for kids. And if I would bring myself into it and bring my own creative twist on things and try to meet kids and engage kids and everything, that all that all is kind of the concept of the whole thing. And AI obviously lets us do that in different ways. And I think that that's probably the big thing that I would encourage people to do is keep that same mindset, keep that same focus of how can I reach these students that are right in front of me. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I have to teach every chapter out of the textbook. It doesn't have to mean, I don't want to ruffle any feathers here, but it doesn't mean that I have to go off to Teachers Pay Teachers and buy a packet of worksheets. It means looking at the kids in front of you and using your human brain and your human heart and your human eyes to be able to look at those students and compare it against all of the experiences that you've had before as a teacher and go, what do we do now? What do we do tomorrow? And you use that formative assessment and you go, what's working and what do I need to change and how do I adjust? And AI can support all of that, but I don't think that it replaces all of that. And so I think that's going to be one of our big questions that we're going to have to wrestle with and answer in the coming years is, where does it fit into that process? Where can it support kids and help them get where they need to go? But then also, where do we see it standing in the way of what we really want to do? And if it stands in the way of it, how can we get rid of that?
Mhm.
It's that balance thing that I think is going to be really hard. And we were still wrestling with that balance earlier with textbooks and worksheet packets, and now it's just different technology. It's just different stuff. Isn't it interesting how education is cyclical like that, right? Like we keep going through the same. I was just talking to somebody earlier today and they said, what advice do you have for people who are trying to integrate AI that are hesitant? And I'm like, well, a lot of my suggestions are the same things I was talking about when we introduced one-to-one computing and when we're
Mhm.
using, technology integration. It's like, it's a lot of the same stuff. So anyway, that's kind of where I would come down on all that, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree with that piece of it's like it's no different than when you have schools going one to one and they're trying out the technology and this was supposed to take away, it was going to the devices were going to replace teachers. They were going
Mhm.
to just sit there on their devices all day, and that was what it was going to be. And of course we know, fast forward now to several years, I mean, not in a good way, but the pandemic definitely accelerated that, and
Yeah.
it hasn't done that. It's
Nope.
opened up new opportunities. It's allowed educators to do things differently and enhance that that student learning experience.
Mhm.
It's going to be the same thing with AI. It's just a matter of learning something new, and difference is people had probably used a computer prior to going one to one.
Yes.
A lot of people probably
Yes.
haven't used AI prior to it becoming a big thing in the last couple of years, and so like
Good
that's
point.
where it's fine to be hesitant, but like
Mhm.
it's still another opportunity, just like having that Chromebook was. So I think that that's a great comparison there of just a few years ago, even.
Yeah, and that also makes me think like the other thing when we're kind of making these similar comparisons too is that if you want to do what's best for students and you want to try to prepare them for a future where AI is a part of it, you don't have to be a computer science, you don't have to
Hmm.
be trained in computer science. You don't have to be an AI guru or anything. You just have to be a user of the technology. It's almost like in education, we don't need highly technical we don't need highly technical training. What we need is great education training and knowing how to apply these tools, because we're not asking students to, like code and create apps and stuff. I know there's some schools that are like tinkering and dabbling with that and everything.
Mhm.
But as far as preparing normal students for all of the roles that are coming up, we need to know how to interact with AI, not necessarily all of the inner workings of how it works. It's like, Brian, with your computer example, we don't have to know how microchips work inside of the device to be able to use it. We just need to know how it applies to our daily life. And I think that may be one of the biggest gifts that we can give students, is our perspective on this technology and looking at it and going, here's what I like about it. Here's how I think it could be helpful. Here's how I would never, ever use it. And if we're willing to share that with students, I think that's maybe the most generous gift that we can give them.
That's a great point.
Yeah, that is a really great point. And coming back to something that you had kind of touched on here, Matt, this idea of like when we use AI, when do we not use AI? I'm hearing a lot of teachers saying that, AI can be used to kind of offload some of those administrative tasks or
Mhm.
time consuming tasks off of their plate. And I feel like this is one place where AI can really be used to give more time
Oh
back to
yeah.
the students. So we know that AI can like create learning objectives, provide differentiation. How do you feel AI can help teachers in like their daily, I got to get stuff done tasks?
I've got examples because I lived it last
Yes.
semester. Before, when I was teaching before, for 11 years, I did a lot of staying after school. I did a lot of show up early. I did a lot of taking things home. We know that sometimes you take things home and you don't do them, but there were definitely times where I did take them home and do them, and I was just like constantly trying to keep up, and my to-do list was always longer than what I could accomplish in a day and everything. When I went back to teach just this last semester, I left at the end of the day. I didn't take stuff home. I was getting things done. My students were learning. They were talking about how, they felt like they were learning Spanish and they were getting better at it and they could tell. And I mean, a lot of this was because I was finding ways to be more efficient. And some of it had to do with, my previous, my prior experience in teaching. And I was able to lean back on some of those things. But some of it was being able to ask ChatGPT or Google Gemini or whatever, what are some ways that I could teach this? How could I do this differently? Having that thought partner, right? A lot of it had to do with if we needed to do some practice questions, because, you don't have to live on Webb's depth of knowledge. You don't have to live at level 4 all the time. You've got to get some of those repetitions in to get some of those basic skills. So sometimes I just needed basic verb conjugation practice questions. ChatGPT is really good at that, so it would crank out a whole bunch of questions that I could give students. It helped me to make images. I used AI image generators to make images that my students could describe, because I knew that was a really good, rich learning practice to have them get good practice at creating their own sentences and, dialoguing in a realistic way. And so I would make those images with AI image generators in a fraction of the time that it took me to fish for images on Google Images. So, I mean, just like all of those little things, I was able to knock out things that I needed to do so that I could spend more time either wrapping up the rest of my to-do list or putting more focus and more emphasis on the stuff that really matters. So I think maybe that's one of the biggest gifts, because you think about over, I don't know how long, years and years and years, we teachers have talked about how time is the biggest factor. It's the biggest thing that keeps us from doing the things that we really want to do. And so if we're able to hand some of that time back to teachers, like, we might see less of them get burned out and leave the profession. We might see them use that time on the things that really matter most, and we might see great gains. I know some of the education AI pundits like to talk about, the teacher time savers and the efficiency. Like, yeah, I know that that's there, but I really want to think about the future. Like, where are we going to? And I'm thinking, yeah, but you've got a lot of burned out teachers right now that this could be an immediate help. So I don't want to like poo-poo that too much. I think it's a big deal, and I saw it myself. So sorry, you got me on a little bit of a soapbox when it came to that one, but I think, I really think that teacher efficiency thing, there's really something to it.
No, that's great. And I mean, that's something I've always really admired about the work that you do is it's always like, here's something you can take and go and do immediately.
Hmm.
That's not to say you shy away from talking about the
Right.
possibilities that technology can do or can have for educators, but you also you have to meet everyone where they're at, and you're explaining that right there and saying like, yeah, there's great things that can be done, but at the same time, let's start with the things that can just maybe give them a little breath of fresh air for a moment. So
Mhm.
Yes.
let's transition now to the student side of that. I know you've always been an advocate for student choice. You've always looked student voice and choice.
Yeah.
All sorts of different things in your books. You talk about choose your own adventures, creating their own quizzes, activities, all sorts of different things where the student is the focal point, as it should be. Um,
Hmm.
what about expanding on some ways that you've seen or you have even tried having AI students engage with AI in the learning process? And so, not just like what the teachers can use AI for, but how
Yeah.
about the students? What have you seen or what have you tried with students?
Yeah. You know, and you all know this as well as I do, like out in the ed tech world, there are lots of tools and apps and different
Hmm.
things,
Mhm.
and some of them are better than others. I was just joking with someone the other day, like there's a significant amount of snake oil being peddled in the ed tech world, and you've got to be really really careful of it, right? But there's a handful of them, and you see lots of them that are just slapping AI onto everything and saying we use AI, and it's like it's a big selling point. But I've seen a handful of places where AI is actually used in meaningful ways to push student learning forward.
Mhm.
And I think my favorite ways are where we're taking good, solid pedagogical practices that we've known about for a long time that sometimes teachers don't use, or sometimes they don't feel like they understand, or they don't know how to do it. And it's empowering teachers to use those practices. I'll give you one of my favorite examples. So there's a product that's come out recently called Mirror Talk. So
Mm.
Mirror Talk it's created by the company Swivel. If you remember those like swivel robots with the iPads, same
Hmm.
Yep.
company, right? So so what they've created is it's this basically like a kind of like an AI chatbot. And whenever you start a Mirror Talk session, it asks the student, tell me something you're working on. Very open-ended. So the student can talk about, a topic that they've been learning about, a project they're working on, something that they're writing about, or whatever. And then it uses AI to generate follow-up questions to get them to reflect on their learning, to get them to think more deeply about the topic, to think about what next steps. So it's really like having a, smart, encouraging tutor sit down next to you and say, have you thought about this? You might look at this. What do you think you're going to do next about this? Have you thought about the connections between these two things? Like all of those really rich follow up questions. It's like no prep for the teacher. All the student has to do is show up and tell the AI what they're working on. And all of a sudden, you've got all of those questions. But the thing that I think impresses me just as much is that once that session is done, and first of all, if that's all the tool was, that would be great. But
Hmm.
after that session is done, it analyzes all the students' responses and it gives the teacher a report on
Mhm.
the student thinking. It even analyzes like where they are on the zone of proximal development. It talks about their tone. It talks about, their mindset, and it gives the teacher all of this really good feedback that is the kind of stuff that we should be measuring or trying to measure anyway. So I think that's kind of like a way that's sort of like a model that I'd like to see more tools emulate, is instead of generating worksheets faster or generating more different types of worksheets, let's look at some of those great learning principles, some of those like pedagogical practices that we want to empower teachers to use that form that lasting, deep learning. And let's find ways to scale that, because if teachers feel like they're overwhelmed or ill-equipped to do that kind of stuff, like, let's work on that problem instead of trying to come up with, faster, better worksheets or something. Anyway, that's just one example. I'm starting to see some other ones, and like student-facing AI chatbots that you see in,
Mhm.
stuff like School AI Spaces and
Mhm.
Magic Schools, Magic Student, and Brisk Teaching now has this thing called Brisk Boost that's kind of like that. I think there's tons of potential for that too. But
Okay.
yeah, some of them are really good. Others are snake oil, but thankfully there are some really good examples that I really like.
Well, yeah, I feel like I'm seeing more and more of these AI tools in the space, and I agree. Like, every time I see a new one, I'm kind of like, oh, is this really necessary? Like, do we need to add
Yeah.
AI to every application that we, could possibly add AI to?
Mhm.
But some of them, like you're saying, are really being used and leveraged to not only interact with students and deepen their learning experience, but also um, to help the teacher understand and get a snapshot of where their students are um, in the learning process. So
Mhm.
it's giving them that insight that's so crucial. Um, yeah, I think that's so important as we move forward in the space.
Yeah. Isn't that such an important question for us to ask? And honestly, the question being, do we really need to add AI to everything? I have heard a handful of ed tech developers and people at some of the ed tech products that have asked that question. Do we really
Mm,
need to add AI to our work? There's a lot of them that I think are just, fear of missing out. They're
mm,
afraid that they're going to get left
Mhm.
behind and swept under the rug and everything. But I think it's an important question. And I don't know if we have enough people that are courageous enough to ask that question and then to act on it. And I think that if we did, it would probably be better. So Linda, I'm really glad you brought that up. That's an important one that if anybody's listening, if any of those ed tech developers are listening right now, I'd say, are you courageous enough to ask that question?
Yeah,
Matt,
that is a great point because I think back to, just a few years ago, the phrase that we heard a lot was, using tech for tech's sake.
mm,
Yep.
And when it came to implementing technology. And so now are we going to shift that and are we going to start saying using AI for AI's sake and just using it just to use it? Or are we using it in a meaningful way? And like Linda was talking about, there does it improve the learning experience and does it provide necessary and crucial feedback for the teacher? And I think that like that might be a good idea as we start having questions of like what do we want this to accomplish?
Yeah.
And that can help us to evaluate whether or not that AI tool is is something we should be pursuing or whether we should be trying it or maybe just leaving it behind in the past.
And along with that, there's all of this research that's been done. I think there was a TED talk that talked about this, about how sometimes choice and too many options can be paralyzing.
Hmm.
I can't remember exactly which one it was, but there was a TED talk about how they did this research on salad dressing, and if there's like a whole aisle of salad dressing, and there's like all of these different options and everything, were people more satisfied with the choice they made if they had 50 choices or like 5 choices? And the answer was they felt more satisfied with their choice if they had chosen between the 5, because
mm,
they
Hmm.
feel like they felt like they could make a good decision with all of that. And there's just something about not throwing more things into the equation, paring things down, making things more simple, making the choices a little bit clearer. And I think when we design a learning environment, when we design lessons, when we design a task, we've got to design it in a way where, you know, we either want it to be clear, or if we put more choices in and we introduce a level of confusion, that it's got to be in the interest of helping students to develop their thinking or developing their skills. And I think if we're not mindful of all of that, we can, we can introduce chaos into learning in places where it's not going to help kids. So I think it all comes down to that, like meaningful, cognizant, aware lesson design. I think and again, we're coming back to all of the root fundamental stuff that we've been trying to do in education for so long. A lot of it just comes back to that.
Agreed.
As we look forward to the future here, Matt, I'm interested to kind of get your take on What skills do you think students are going to need to develop to thrive in a world that's going to be increasingly influenced by AI? They're going to be moving into the workplace that's going to be using AI, right? And what are those skills exactly that you feel like students will need?
Oh, Linda, you asked me one of my favorite questions to talk about when it comes to AI.
Glad to hear it.
Just like
All
setting
right.
me up. I love it. This is great. Because I think I touched on this, I think, a little bit earlier, but I'll bring it up very briefly again that it's easy for people to say, oh, if we want to prepare kids for a world, a future where there's lots of AI, then let's just use AI. Let's just use it. And I think there's some benefit to that, but I think that that's using the nuance of a sledgehammer. It's not nuanced enough for me, you know. Um, if I want to introduce AI into an equation, I want to make sure that it is actually preparing students for the future. So to come back to your question, if we want to prepare students for this future where AI is going to be a big part of it, where AI is going to be a big part of certain, careers and certain types of work and everything, what do we need to do? And, I've started trying to get a picture of what this future is going to look like as best as I can anyway. So I've been reading books from people who are working deeply and closely with this AI technology, like Mo Gaudat, who worked in Google's AI efforts, and Mustafa Suleiman, who's an AI CEO, and Ray Kurzweil, who's like a guy who's done a lot of prognosticating and predicting of the future and has gotten a lot of things right in the past.
Mhm.
And if you start to look at this future, I'm going to spare you all some of the details because some of it is creepy. Some of it is very different than what we're expecting. Like, I'm going to save you the nights of not being able to sleep. And just say that with some of these futures that they're predicting, I'm thinking that we don't need to necessarily throw kids into a whole bunch of AI today, because really today's AI is going to be some of the most rudimentary AI that our students will use in their entire lives. It's just going to continue to get better and better. But some of the things that I really think is going to be important is developing, for instance, good problem solving and critical thinking skills. It's something that we've talked about in education for the longest time, right? And so
Mhm.
as AI continues to develop and as the workforce gets disrupted and as education gets disrupted and as things start to look different, our ability to adapt to that kind of stuff, the problem solving, adapting to new things. For instance, we talk in a lot of our mission statements in schools about the importance of being a lifelong learner. I think that's just as important now as it ever has been. That idea of students being able to learn new things on the fly and being able to when something new comes along, it's like, well, how can I learn everything I can about it? How can I figure out how it fits in the puzzle of everything else? And see, all of that stuff isn't necessarily learn how to use AI better. It's not
Mhm.
necessarily that, because what are we doing here? We're still developing human skills, right? We're still developing our own human intelligence. And so I think if we want to prepare students for that future world where AI is a bigger and bigger part of it, sure, we want to prepare them for the AI skills. We want them to have certain AI literacies, but I think we also can't neglect the human skills, the human abilities of problem solving, critical thinking, developing relationships, adapting to the changes in the world, being a lifelong learner, like all of that stuff. Some of that stuff that we've been talking about in education for a while is still going to serve the human side of us. So yeah, we got to get the technology side of it right. We can't neglect that, but I think that's an
Mhm.
important part of it too. Sorry, you got me on my soapbox on this one.
That's all right. That's great. Well, you've been really generous with your time, and we want to kind of wrap up our conversation today with an activity, just like we started. And so, are you up for a little bit of a challenge?
Oh gosh, you heard how I reacted to the first one, right? But yeah, I think I'm willing to do it. Let's do another one. It'll be fun. It'll be fun, right?
Yes, it will. All right, let's get started. All right, here's the challenge. A teacher has started using AI tools, something like ChatGPT, in their classroom to help students with assignments and projects. While some students use it to improve their writing and generate creative ideas, others are relying too heavily on the tool, submitting work that's essentially AI written with little personal effort on their own. The teacher wants to maintain the benefits of AI while ensuring students engage in authentic critical thinking. How would you help this teacher structure their next project to balance AI use in the classroom, encourage meaningful learning without students becoming overly dependent on technology? We'll give you about 20. All right. Now let's see what you got. Matt, what are your thoughts?
Oh, so many thoughts. So, and this really, I feel like this is it's a great example. It's a great challenge for us to wrestle with, because I feel like this is something that so many teachers are dealing with right now. And so, first of all, the fact that this teacher is wanting to bring AI into the assignment and just identifying that it exists and helping students try to make sense of it and everything, I think is great. But then as soon as students start to see that AI is a thing, and when they start to talk to their friends and start to look on TikTok, and they start to see that there's all of these other ways that people are using it, then they start to see that, oh, wow, I can use it to do my work for me and everything. And so this is where I think the messy experimentation starts to come into play. And for us to understand that there is no clear cure-all thing. I think a lot of times people look at AI detectors as an answer, as a solution to all of this, but we also have to know that AI detectors, A, are flawed and inaccurate, and B, also don't reflect that AI can be a part of the process without actually doing the whole thing. So I think the AI detector thing that's not the solution. It's not the answer is to come down with an iron fist and say, you cheating cheaters, you used AI. But, it's kind of like, what if you used, anyway, there's a lot I could say about that. So what do we do? I think for one, as teachers, we can model how it's supposed to look. Now, this is not going to keep every single kid from abusing AI and using it in ways that we don't want it to, but I think this is maybe one of our best options, because we do have a lot of kids in our classes that want to do the right thing, and they want to figure out how this works, and they want to be, what we want them to be, So we will catch a lot of them in the right way by not catch. That's not the right word. We will empower a lot of them to do the right thing by modeling how it's supposed to look and encouraging them and saying, this is the way that I would use it. And I wouldn't use it that way. And if you use it in this way, here are the negatives. I think we also have to I would also tell this teacher that we have to identify that we don't really have as much control over our students as we think that we do. And this even happened before AI, where we thought that whenever students turn things in, that we had turn it in, and we had our ways to keep them from cheating and everything. But in reality, students are going to do what they're going to do. If they want to avoid the thinking and they want to avoid the work, they will find ways to do it. We don't really have as much control as we think that we do. And I think this is just like, the emperor's, what is it? I lost
The
it.
Emperor's New Clothes.
Yes, thank you. Yes, that's it. The Emperor's New Clothes. Like, all of a sudden, we're starting to realize that it isn't what we thought that it was. I could go on and on with this. I think that I've seen in my own classroom for a version of this. We dealt with a lot of online language translators. And so I had to battle with this is the language translators. That's a version of this. And I started to find that if I wanted students to not lean too much on the translators, which is kind of like students leaning too much on ChatGPT, I had to kind of chunk the assignment, because part of that issue was students feeling like they were not capable of doing the assignment. It was a
Mm.
self-efficacy issue. It was I don't think I can do this, so I don't want to fail, so I'm going to use this technology so that I don't fail. And so for me, it meant going back to the basics and saying, okay, you see this one little task I'm going to give you? This is a teeny tiny little task and you know how to do it. You can do this. And they do the one little task and it's like, oh, I did that. That's fine. And then I'm like, okay, here's the next little chunk of it. Here's the next little chunk of it. Does it feel like you're holding their hands and maybe coddling them too much? It might, but what's the alternative? Let's give them a great big task that they don't feel like they can do, and then they're going to go turn it over to AI. I think we got to get real about it. I could go on and on. There's like all of these things that this is what I've been thinking about, is how does this really show up in a real way in classrooms? But I think those are some of the things that I would encourage the teacher to think through. I've never played this challenge game for you before, so I don't know if I did that right or not, but I hope that was something in the direction of what you were hoping for.
No, you did great, Matt.
Thanks.
Yes. Thanks so much for being along for the ride on that one. And yeah, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. As a teacher in the classroom myself, I remember using things like Turnitin and these things to hopefully make students have more academic integrity and be more involved in the process and not rely on technology maybe to just copy and paste. But I think we're seeing the need to prepare for AI and work with AI in a way that's a little bit more creative and not just relying on can we catch them plagiarizing, even though that is a real problem. That is something that teachers are really facing. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I totally agree with
Yeah.
that. I might even add too, I feel like our definition and our concept of plagiarism will start to change a little bit too. As the technology comes out, because really all that plagiarism is it's a judgment call. It's us passing judgment on the way that a certain thing is and saying, this is not what we want. And I think as the technology comes out and as we start to identify what our relationship is with it and what we want to do with it, our version of what we consider plagiarism and cheating might start to change a little bit too. And so as that evolves, that's going to change the whole scenario too. It's just a big, murky, messy situation, especially when the technology is changing so fast that our definitions can't keep up with it. But it's definitely going to be a challenge. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you bring up the idea of like those AI detectors and things like that, because I know that it's not as much now as it maybe was 6 months ago, a year ago. It's prevalent, and when you talk to teachers, they're starting to come around on the and not be as worried about the cheating aspect, but it's still there, and I think that it's a very valid concern, and I think that that's what drives some of the uncertainty and the cautiousness about moving forward with AI, but this goes back to it's been sprinkled in throughout the entire conversation today of the idea that, this isn't something new. And just like, and I'm sure you had these conversations when you first started going out and speaking in front of groups of teachers of, okay, yes, in theory, a student can take that device in front of them and use it to cheat, but you have to create the Google proof assessments or the Google proof activities
Yep.
where they can't Google the question and get the answer. And so
Mhm.
I think that that's the big thing now is, we just take that and we just, again, we've talked about this throughout the entire conversation.
Yeah.
Take what we've learned about improving teaching and learning with just a straight computer device and whatever it is in front of you, and now apply that to AI. And I think that that's a good approach and that's a good thought process to have. And I appreciate that, we focus on how do we help, everybody move forward with AI, not just those early adopters. And I think that's a great way to start.
Yeah. And I think the other part to add to what you were saying, Brian, is I think we also have to identify where we do and don't invite AI into the equation, right? And we figure out, in what ways can it enhance our thinking instead of replace our thinking, and what ways can it enhance the skills instead of replace the skills. And so I think if we find places where we can invite it into the learning process where it fits and it makes sense and it pushes us forward as humans, because that's really what we're in the human development business. right?
Yeah.
And so if it helps to develop us as humans, then maybe we find a place for it there. And these are those conversations that everybody's having. We're all trying to figure it out together. And I love that, on the show here, you all are willing to participate in that process and help everybody kind of think and talk out loud about this as we all wrestle and try to push ourselves forward. So I think just having this conversation here has been a really good thing.
Well, Matt, thank you for having the conversation with us today and for joining us on the podcast. Where can people find you if they want more, if they want to learn more about you or the work that you do?
Yeah, probably the best place is just to go to my website, which is called Ditch That Textbook. I've been sharing practical teaching ideas with technology and to engage students for more than 10 years at this point there. So I've got an email newsletter that people subscribe to. And so if you go to the website there and find the subscribe button, you can get in on that email newsletter to get, the kind of stuff we've been talking about here shows up on my email newsletter first. And of course I'm, sort of all over the socials. So really active on Twitter. I'm not going to call it Elon's one letter name because I just can't. I've also been trying to sort of up my TikTok, Instagram Reels game too, and trying to do more video and everything. So, you can find me any of those places to keep the conversation going.
Awesome. Matt, thank you. It's always great when our paths cross, and we appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for being a part of this, and we really appreciate it.
Of course. I appreciate you both. Thanks so much.
Hey, are you new to AI and want to learn more? Well, the LTC has an online course for that. Visit us at courses.ltcillinois.org to register for our free AI 101 for Schools course, where you can explore the current AI tools and how to use them in your classroom. Best of all, the course is self-paced, so you can complete it on your schedule.
And if you loved today's episode and want to hear more of our smooth, sweet jazz voices, consider following the One-to-One podcast.
Well, all right, Linda, I will see you next time where we will be sitting down one-to-one.